About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll
Testing.
make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with
Testing.
Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Good evening. Hello and welcome to our latest live stream for A-Level Politics. I'm joined as usual by Ciara, who is
Hello.
that way. Hi Ciara, how are you this evening?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Not bad at all, yeah. And we're looking at political parties this evening, as it sort of features in the democracy and participation type bit of the A-level specification, and it's quite broad ranging, wide ranging, isn't it? Political parties, because we could talk about there's some stuff, a little bit of the history of the parties and the ideas within the parties. There's policy, there's the kind of function and role of parties, whether we're a two-party or multi-party system, and all that kind of thing all comes under political parties. So there's quite a lot potentially to cover. We'll be covering some aspects of that today. And just before we get going with it, because I know in advance that I think it's the first activity's got some policy in there. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Policy can be quite tricky because, of course, it's not all, unless it's election time and manifestos have just been published or whatever, it's not always totally clear what a party's policy is. You kind of know what the government's policies are because they're kind of announcing it all the time. And the opposition parties might reveal the odd policy as they go. And sometimes you like looking back to what they were saying a few years ago, and sometimes you might suspect that might not be what they still think necessarily, because the parties change a little bit, sometimes quite quickly over time. I'm sort of thinking Labour now compared with 2019, some policies are likely to be Well, we already know that some
Yeah,
policies are definitely different, and that probably some that
because Keir
haven't
Starmer
been.
promised, didn't he? He said in his when he was running to be leader of Labour that he wouldn't stray too far from what Corbyn had started. But
Yeah,
obviously, he has gone very far from that. So
yeah,
it's also for this, the activity is looking at the pledges that both, well, what did Rishi Sunak called it, key promises,
yeah.
and Keir Starmer called it the pledges. So we'll see
Yes.
that, because I think that sets across their direction before their manifestos come out, right?
So I remember, obviously, this is slightly different, but the pledges that Keir Starmer made when he was running to be leader. I think that there's lots of graphics on social media and stuff now with crosses next to most of them. They're no longer pledges, but these are more recent pledges. But yeah, okay. Shall we? Shall we get started? Okay. So if you haven't watched us before, by the way, do. Yeah, the idea is you join in, you can type into the live chat window with your answers. These ones are Labour or Conservative, so you can just put L or C or Lab or Con or Labour or Conservative. And if you're not watching live, then you can pause the video for a bit if you like and have longer to think about the answers. Okay, sorry, Kira, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. So basically, what pledge or promise is this from? Which political party? So just put in the chat the one that you think is the correct answer. So, which party has promised that they were going to halve inflation, or have inflation halved by the end of 2023? Fizzy the Cat's going with Labour. Yeah, I think it's in line with things that Labour have talked about. But then would they have the power to do that, right? So who would be in the position where they could halve inflation? And it's also, this party is very obsessed with things like inflation, even though it doesn't really affect us day to day in the way that, other support might as well, more state funding and things.
Obviously, inflation has been a sort of priority for everyone of late, hasn't it, because of the cost of living crisis. But this was quite an interesting pledge because some people were saying, they were kind of expecting, although then that was before other international events have kind of come along and are probably going to have an impact on the economy. Thinking it would sort of happen naturally because the Ukraine war sort of caused a really big spike in inflation, and so you kind of expect inflation to fall as a year beyond that passed and things. But actually, the pledge might not be as easy to meet as people perhaps initially predicted it would be.
Yeah. So should we show the answer for this one then?
I think we should.
So this one was actually, it was the Conservatives. So it's a Conservative promise, and like Duncan said, they're not doing too well on this one. Yeah, so they're kind of interested in trying to keep the economy, like things like inflation, down because it's better for business and things like that. But of course, Labour would also agree with this, but they're just not in power right now. So the next one then. So this party wants to cut NHS waiting lists. So
Again, it's
waiting lists for
quite
the
like.
NHS.
I was going to say
Go
again.
on, sorry.
I was going to say I suspect both might think it's a good thing to do, but which have specifically pledged to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So both do obviously think that this is a good thing to do, and they have skyrocketed. I think this is one of the biggest concerns to voters right now, because obviously, people are waiting years to get kind of simple healthcare appointments, so it's pretty bad. But actually, this is, interestingly, yes, it's something that Labour would say, but it was deliberately tricky. I'm sorry, it was actually the Conservatives who said this. So it's kind of that credibility gap, though, isn't it? It's the difference. It's the difference between the government's rhetoric and then the actual reality, right? Because they're not quite coming through with these promises. Okay, so shall
And
we
of
look at
course,
the next one?
sometimes things are easier said than done. Of course, you can have a pledge, but you need a policy program to actually deliver it, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and it's like, how do they do these pledges mid? Well, not mid, but like when they're nearly to the end of their term in government, and do they
Yeah,
have the
sure.
right to do that? Because it wasn't on their manifesto. Um, so this one wants to promote peace and human rights. Which party might advocate for this particularly?
Again, perhaps in the news a bit at
Okay,
the
yeah,
moment.
yeah. And it's actually kind of in response to the other parties' attempt to try to curb human rights a bit, finding them a bit of problematic and um, like reducing effective government as well.
Shall
So I
we have a
think Fizzy
look?
the Cat's got this one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Fizzy the Cat has got this. Fizzy the Cat's doing a lot of legwork here. We've got more people watching. Do join in and have some put some suggestions in. Yeah, okay, but absolutely
Yeah.
well done, Fizzy the Cat. Yeah, and as I mentioned, sort of some degree of controversy over that at the moment, and I think nearly half Labour's councillors in Burnley, down the road from me, resigned yesterday with a disagreement over foreign policy. So there are
Mm.
big debates and disagreements within certainly the Labour Party over some issues relating to peace and human rights at the moment. Some disagreements within the Conservative Party as well. Okay.
Yeah, because it was interesting because it was a position to be starkly against the Conservatives and the Rwanda deal in terms of moving asylum seekers and things
Yes,
like that.
absolutely.
Um, but obviously, yeah, like you said, they're tripping up over this a bit now because is Labour that party? Is it the party of human rights? And I think they're struggling to maintain their younger voting base, particularly Gen Z and millennials. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see how the next election goes for them.
Yes, and that's obviously always going to be a difficult balancing act, keeping the sort of liberal left younger voters alongside the perhaps the kind of red wall type voters that they're wanting to get
Mm.
back, and also I think there's there's a lot of emphasis on the moment about being the next government and looking like the next government, and how that would impact their kind of foreign policy ideas and things as well. So it's an
Mm.
interesting time. Economic
Yeah,
justice. What do we mean by economic justice?
that's a very good question because it depends on who you ask, really.
Yeah.
To a conservative, economic justice would be the taxpayer being able to decide how they spend their money. So low taxation, so that people have more freedom to choose where their money goes. Whereas to Labour, historically at least, it would be high taxation to redistribute wealth. So yeah, is it annoyingly tricky again? Sorry, I tried to be deliberately confusing. And now
Yeah.
I'm regretting
No,
it.
not at all. I mean, I think, you know, when we talk about justice often we use it in terms of social justice, don't we? But I think probably similar with economic justice, it's it's often used almost synonymously with fairness, isn't it? And I think it's implying something sort of a little more egalitarian or whatever, isn't it? I think to a certain extent.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and
So
the
what
answer
they're talking
was
about
Labour.
is distribution. Yeah, and they're talking about economic distribution. So one of the policies, I'm not sure if they've actually kept it, but about trying to remove charity status, yeah, from private schools, so that they would pay an extra 20% on their fees in order to share that money more fairly across
Yeah.
society. So that's their version of justice. Don't worry, Fizzy the Cat. It was
No, no,
deliberately
these
confusing.
are these are tricky. Yeah, that's. I think that one is the that policy is still there, isn't it? I think I can't remember, but there's the VAT one. There was one to do with VAT and one to do with. Anyway, I think that one. I think that policy is still there. One of
Yeah.
the few.
No, we'll
Yeah.
see.
Uh,
Stop the boats. Who goes on about this?
I suppose we ought to
So,
confirm which boats we're talking about.
yeah, probably actually, yeah. So it's referring to the kind of refugee crisis and how a lot of people are coming into the country through illegal means on things like small lifeboats and life rafts and stuff, just things like that. and rubber dinghies and stuff. And the issue is when they to the government is when they land in the UK has to look after them. So they're trying to find ways to stop that from happening. Okay, yeah, got this nice and loud with Fizzy the cat.
Fizzy the cat has
Yeah,
shouted Conservative, and Fizzy the cat is of course correct. Yeah, just trying to encourage some of the others to suggest some answers here. It'd be good. But well done. Okay, well done, Fizzy the cat. Moving on to a different activity, one called Who Said What. And you got to watch carefully with this one. There's pay attention to who says what.
yeah. So we're we're trying to think about how. So you're going to look at the statements. You're going to listen, read their statements, and then it's about thinking, well, which political party might they be inclined to vote for? So just watching carefully. Who do you think they might vote for?
There's more than one possible answer for some of them, aren't there? But there's a best fit, I think, would be the.
Yeah,
Would that be fair to say? Yeah.
yeah. So there's quite a lot of things coming thick and fast, but you could just write Andre, which number he would fit. Would he
Yeah.
vote for Labour?
Can you remember who said what now?
Yeah, can you remember? Maybe I'll read out Andre's statement again, and then you can think
Okay.
who he might vote for.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Andre said, "We can only have economic justice if the top 5% of earners pay higher tax."
Who might
Oh, we've
that
got a
be?
good guess
Yeah. Fizzy the cat saying
from Daphne.
Daphne might well have been Plaid Cymru. I can't
That's
remember
actually,
the.
yeah, I see what you're saying. It's two potential
Oh
options.
yeah.
She could be,
Yeah, it
yeah,
could
she
be.
could be, yeah,
There was another one that could
uh,
potentially be Plaid Cymru as well, though.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, so Fizzy the cat's got one right so far, so good. So Andre would definitely, I'd say, yeah, would vote for Labour. Bernice said,
What did Andre say again?
Andre said, we can only have economic justice if the top 5% of earners pay higher
Okay.
tax. So that is a
Okay.
Labour policy still
Is
for now.
that still okay? Yeah. I can't see that
Yeah,
making
yeah,
it
yeah.
to, I can't see it making it to the general election, but okay, it is still
I
it
checked it
is
on
still policy
Sunday.
at the moment.
So
Okay, jolly good.
as of Sunday,
Um,
it was.
yeah,
Let's see.
Andre
He's a bit
Labour,
of a flip flopper, good old Starmer.
Eliza
um,
Green. Okay.
Bernice said we need environmental justice. Cameron said we should empower individuals to make their own financial decisions by reducing the tax burden. Daphne says the UK is dominated by English interests.
So there's two possible
And
ones there, isn't there?
yeah, it could be, right? And Eliza said, I am centre left, but I want a party that advocates specifically for Wales.
So Fizzy the cat has said Bernice would be green.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
I would agree
She
with
wants
that as well.
environmental justice.
I'm not sure about
Yeah.
the others. Is anyone else going to join in? I think we've got some quieter watchers. Not being brave in the chat window. Shall we have a look at the answers?
Yeah, let's have a look. Quite a lot to remember on
Okay.
that one, actually. Yeah.
There was a lot to remember, yeah. But you got most of them there, Fizzy the cat. Well done.
Yeah. So yeah, we see like the conservative idea about individualism in the sense that people should be spending their own money, not being dependent, kind of a Thatcherite idea. Daphne arguing that the UK is just England plus, so frustrated by that, which is very similar to Eliza. Actually, they could have the same, but she's talking specifically about Wales. And then, of course, Andre with a very clear Labour policy for now. So we can see the different spread of political views of the parties and how Plaid's Cymru, I don't know if I've said that right, Cymru,
Plaid
is more or
Cymru.
less the same as Labour, but obviously with a Welsh focus on that.
Okay. Party donations. Do you want to explain a little bit what we're discussing here, and then we'll explain
Okay,
how the
so for
activity
this,
works.
yeah, so for this next bit, what we're thinking about is really we're kind of looking at political parties, but through the lens of democracy. Like, do they help or hinder the health of our democracy? And one of the things that is often brought into criticism is the fact that with the way that our parties are funded, they're funded by donations, and this can take different forms. It can be individuals putting donations in. It can be organisations like trade unions donating as well. So we're thinking, well, how much money does each political party have? And of course, money is incredibly important if you're running for election, because the more money you have, the more advertisements and things you can have too. So YouTube adverts, TV adverts, as well as posters and leaflets and things like that.
Absolutely. So things have gone strange in the chat window, but we'll worry about that in a minute. Okay, so I'm sure I'm seeing some names that weren't up there now. Was there a Gerald? Anyway, leaving that for a minute. So we're talking the total donations here that they received for the 2019 election, each party. So we're starting with the Brexit party, and then for each one it's just whether they got more or less money in donations. So the Brexit party got 4.2 million. That's quite a lot. It feels like quite a lot of money.
And then the question is, where did the money come from? There's an issue with not being able to trace the party funding properly, and it's called dark money when we can't work out its origin. So that's concerning, right?
What do we reckon? Liberal Democrats, did they receive more or less than £4.2 million in donations?
So at the time of when the spec was created, they were the third biggest party in the UK. Obviously, they're not really anymore, but they are a major political party. Do you think it's going to be higher or lower?
Fizzy the Cat's thinking lower. What do you reckon, Chile? That's the other person who's joined in. Got some offering some opinions about where they got their money from, but Chile's thinking it might be higher. I mean, as you know, as Ciara was saying, we think of the Liberal Democrats as a major party. They stand candidates in every seat. Pretty much. Brexit Party chose not to stand against some Conservative seats, and quite a lot of Conservative seats.
I forgot about that deal.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. But it's quite a lot lower, isn't it?
Yes, that's a concerning amount lower, considering the Liberal Democrats have like a decent sized membership and things like that. For it to be not just lower, but by nearly 3 million is concerning, I think.
Shall we look what the next one is?
Yeah. Okay, Labour. Is Labour going to be higher or lower than the Lib Dems? I think we can probably guess pretty confidently.
This one should be a pretty quick one, shouldn't it?
Yeah, Chile higher, of course. Yes, yeah, it is higher. But can you put a rough guess?
Sorry,
how much?
I jumped the gun. Then would it be good to have a good guess? It's not as much higher than the Brexit Party as you'd think.
No, it's not. It's not too shy from the Brexit Party when you think, and I think actually it's because our political parties don't have that much money in the same way that they do in the US. Like, our politics is a lot cheaper in that sense, but it is still concerning, I think, that how high the Brexit Party is, and Labour's 5.4 million. It's a lot of money, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we look who next? Conservatives. Obviously, they won the 2019 elections. That might count for something. Another major party like Labour, standing candidates everywhere. I reckon you'll know whether it's higher or lower. And perhaps the interesting thing is how much higher?
Yeah, we got
Yeah, so
Chile
we've
and
got,
Peter the Cat are both right. Yeah.
yeah. How much higher though, do you reckon? Just a bit higher?
Do you reckon it's slightly? Yeah, or maybe by 2 million, 5 million. There's only
A
1 million
whole.
between the Brexit vote. Oh, good
Oh, she's
guess.
gone
Yeah.
for 8.9 million. That's very precise, isn't it? Should we have a look?
Yeah. Let's have a look. 19.4 million pounds. It was crazy. And where's it come from? Where is this money? Where is it originating from? This is a lot.
Well, we'll break it down a little bit shortly, won't we? Not, yeah,
We
but that
will.
is
Yeah,
a
we're gonna actually look at where it comes from.
huge difference. And you think what an impact um, money has on elections, because obviously it pays, as Kira was saying, it pays for so much. It pays for the advertising, the leaflets, the
Mm.
you know, um, a lot of the advertising, these days is sort of social media type advertising that people don't even kind of necessarily know they're consuming.
Yeah, and even like people to go door knocking and things like that does make quite an impact. And I think maybe a party like Labour and even the Lib Dems would have more volunteers doing that.
Yep.
Whereas I do know the Conservatives do struggle to get that. So they probably be paying people.
Certainly for delivering leaflets, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What about
So the
all
last
other parties combined? Now, there are a
this
lot of
includes the
parties.
Green Party as
Yeah,
well. This does include the Green Party, which is also a fairly big party.
yeah. There are a lot of other significant parties. Can I just check? Is this just in England, or is this? Do we
Yeah.
not know? Yeah, this is just in England. Okay, so it's yeah, it's not.
No, no, sorry, it does include the Scottish National
Oh,
Party
does
as
it?
well.
Oh, it does. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it does. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So this includes some pretty significant parties. Oh wow! So lots of people saying higher, 30 to 40 million. You'd think it must be, wouldn't you?
I would think so. I'd hope so.
50
'Cause, like,
million.
if I would hope that this would be higher than the Conservatives. Yeah, if it's all of the other
Just one
parties.
party. Because otherwise,
Mm,
no. Okay. It's a lot
it's
less.
lower. Quite a lot less. Yeah. And then this is really a great example, I think, when talking about funding and thinking to the wider issue of pluralism. So, can we have a healthy democracy where there's such a concentration of voice in the main political parties? And again, I think it just really highlights where did that money come from for the Brexit Party when we're looking at the fact that more all other minor parties have a concerning amount less money.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously some of the big but regional parties, and I use that term probably incorrectly because obviously Wales and Scotland aren't regions, but parties that are only in parts of the UK, although they're significant, they don't stand in that many seats. SNP is the biggest, obviously, of the sort of devolved type parties. But as you say, there are parties like the Green Party that do stand in most seats. And so require quite a lot of money, to do that and to put up a campaign and to. So it's quite a surprising statistic, that, isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
we're going to look at some data now. Now, if you're doing this on your phone or something, the table when it comes up might be quite small to read the data. Hopefully, you're on a massive widescreen telly or something. But we'll see how you do that. If you need us to interpret any of the data or read any of the figures to you, we can do. Obviously, just type in the chat window if you need us to read some of the figures. But there's some data for you to interpret. Got a number of parties there with their registered donations. And where they come from, not broken down very, very far, but between individuals, companies, trade unions, and other. And
I
it
don't know
does
what
give you a
other
couple
would
of
be, but
it gives a couple of examples under there.
membership maybe.
Yeah, and down at the bottom it's saying includes
Oh
limited
yeah.
liability partnerships, public funds, unincorporated associations. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Membership's an interesting one, isn't it? I suppose that doesn't class as membership fees. Probably doesn't
Yeah,
class as
that's
a
it. Yeah, it doesn't
donation.
count as
Yeah,
funding.
yeah.
Yeah, actually, and that maybe skews the figures because Labour would have
Yes,
quite a sizable amount from their membership.
yeah. Labour had the biggest membership at that time, but okay. We'll start a clock going. See what you'd say about some of this data.
Good observation from Chile so far as well, where most of the Conservative money is coming from. Not necessarily, we don't know
No,
this
we don't know.
all,
We don't.
but
Doesn't tell us which companies on here, does it? But and actually, is most of it coming from companies? They've got more from companies than anyone else. But there's one even bigger number.
excellent Chile, yeah, great.
Clock ran down pretty quickly, but we can give you another minute or so just to see if there's any other points that you'd pick up from. So Chile's noted that quite a significant chunk of the Conservative Party's money comes from companies, and we might think that perhaps they're more associated with business, and Labour has a significant amount from trade unions. In fact, by far their largest source of donations comes from trade unions.
And I think that's important because when we're thinking about when somebody gives money, it's never just kind of for the sake of it. There's a purpose. So Conservatives are clearly out of all the parties, most of their money does come from businesses and companies. So what do those companies get out of it?
Fizzy the Cat's talked about individuals funding the Conservative Party, and that perhaps higher earners and people with more money might be more inclined to vote Conservative, and therefore perhaps more inclined to fund the Conservative Party in the hope that they'll get in government. We've already talked about them tending to prefer lower taxation, for example, which obviously would be in the interests of people with more money, arguably.
Yeah.
So that could be an impact there. Yeah, I mean, the individual donations to the Conservative Party really does dwarf individual donations for anyone else. The second is the Brexit Party.
Yeah, and when we're thinking about what do they get out of it, does this mean that they're having maybe conversations with the leader of the Conservative Party and then Prime Minister? Are they influencing policy, which obviously would be undemocratic because it's not supposed to be about how much money you have, but just by all of us having the same voice and access to politics. Yeah, good word to use, Fizzy the Cat. So lobbying. So it's the increasing of lobbying as a result.
Yeah. And it's it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's occasional debates about whether there should be limits on how much, how big donations can be given, how big each individual donation could be, and one of the arguments that sometimes comes up, because both main parties, and I think most of the main parties, kind of in theory, have agreed to some sort of donation limitation, and the sticking point tends to be over trade union donations.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is that the trade unions tend to see their donations as being a lot of small individual donations rather than a smaller number of large large donations, if you see what I mean, because of it's the pooling
Yeah,
of their members' donations rather than one wealthy individuals giving a lot of money, as is the
yeah.
case with, say, the Brexit Party.
I've always found that quite frustrating as an argument because Labour does get kind of criticised a lot over its union funding, and things like calling Starmer and Corbyn before him just under the thumb of the union bosses and things like that, and they have been quite heavily criticised for that. But then I just never knew why they didn't throw back. Well, you've got this much money that's donated
Yeah,
to you by individuals. How do you justify that?
yes, and you could make an argument, of course, that trade union money out of all of those, in theory, is the most democratic because they're internally democratic organisations. But that's a debate for another time. And obviously there are flip sides to it, because I suppose the other thing is that out of all of those, trade unions are the ones that have a direct, open influence on policy. As you were saying, there are lots of indirect influence on policy through lobbying, etc. But trade unions get to vote within the Labour Party, so it's
And
they.
Chile made a good point here about unions, actually. So the only problem with trade unions is that bargaining for higher wages distorts the labour market and reduces firms' supernormal profit, which reduces their ability to expand and create more jobs.
Well, that's
Okay.
an interesting one for the
Um,
economists. We can might have
yeah, it's
that
very
might be for
economist.
that might be a good one for one of the economics live streams coming up.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's also a good counter to what we were saying about trade
mhm,
unions being more democratic
yeah,
because, workers are one aspect of
yeah.
society, I
It's
guess. And if they
they're
are,
interest groups. They're sectional interest groups. They represent a
yeah, so
section,
does that give
and
them too much influence when what should a government do? Should they act in the national interests and think about it as a whole? Is the aim of government to have a strong economy that creates jobs? Or is it to have a fair economy, which is what trade unions would advocate for? So it's an interesting argument.
yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else in the in that we might want to pick up from there? Um, not which football teams people support. Um, I think one quite interesting one there is how low the individual donations were to the Labour Party in 2019. I think that was unusually low.
Mm.
So the Labour Party in other elections, particularly with other leaders, had higher individual donations. I'm sure it'll be much higher at the next election. So it's quite interesting
Yeah,
that sort of there weren't the wealthy individuals choosing to bankroll the Labour Party in 2019 that there
because
were at other elections.
they lost J.K. Rowling, didn't they? She used to support them, and then she refused to support them under Corbyn.
And there were other big names, some of whom actually stopped earlier. Some stopped under Ed Miliband as well. Thinking people like Lord Sainsbury, and yeah, there were quite a few big wealthy individual donors who may choose to donate again in the future. Okay, shall we see what you put there? But came up with lots of them. Yeah, Labour mostly
Very
funded by trade
simple
unions.
compared to the others.
Conservatives overwhelmingly individual
Yeah.
donors. But they are the key things to take away from that, aren't they? Yeah.
And
But
Chile's now standing up for trade unions. I don't know if you saw. Chile said trade unions are important in the public sector as the
yeah,
government has a lot of control and there are few alternatives for jobs like teaching. That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
So collective
interesting
bargaining
debate.
does have its role.
Interesting
It's
debate.
good
I
nuance.
think it's quite interesting to see that the company donations to Conservative and trade union donations to Labour are a similar amount, and the big difference really comes down to the individual donations. As you mentioned before, the membership fees aren't included in there, and Labour 2017-2019 was by far the biggest membership party, and so that did bump up their funds a bit, but they were still a long way down, and they spent a lot less money in that election. And absolutely, it's always good to have evaluation points, Chile. Absolutely, we want to hear the different sides of the arguments in these things. That's exactly what you need.
And you could be
Okay.
asked to analyze data like that in your exam. It has happened before, so it's just about looking at that carefully, exactly as you've all done there, and thinking about what does this mean, and then thinking widely to the impact that has on democracy or whatever the question is asking you.
Yeah, so you could have some data in a source. It's interesting overall there that by far the biggest source of donations for parties is from individuals, when taken as, looking at all the parties altogether. Yeah,
That's because the Conservatives one
it
is
is.
so high. I think
It
it
is,
tips the
yeah.
scale
It
quite
does,
significantly.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But the Brexit Party one there was very high as well that time. Okay, I think the Liberal Democrats got a bit of a boost from some big Remain funders. The Liberal Democrats' individual funding is quite a lot, as you notice, a lot higher than Labour's. There were some people who chose to donate to the Liberal Democrats in the hope of reversing Brexit. Okay,
Yeah.
right. Finished with a bit of a debate, and it's
Yeah, and
on.
just like Chile said about evaluation. Sorry, go on, Duncan.
I was just going to say, after all that thing about the funding of political parties, obviously one of the solutions to the problems we've just been discussing about is maybe individuals, trade unions, companies, none of these things should fund parties. Maybe the state should fund them instead, like a public service. Controversial suggestion, though.
Yeah, I felt a bit more convinced by it lately, though, especially after looking at that table.
Yeah.
And when we're thinking about it, the more money a party has, the more likely it is that they can get elected. Perhaps, maybe that's not a fair statement because the Brexit Party didn't exactly, didn't come close to
No,
Labour. So
but they did. But they did have a big impact. You know,
they did,
yeah,
yeah.
they helped get the outcome they wanted, which of course was for the Conservatives to win. Which is
Yeah, and I think they could push public opinion quite substantially because of the funding, right?
yeah.
So, what arguments can you think of for maybe why we should switch to state funding? And it has been proposed as an idea.
Obviously, there's a bit
So
of
yeah,
state
please go.
funding. I was just say there's a bit of state funding already, isn't there? Of particularly the parliamentary parties get some state funding called short money,
Mhm.
which essentially helps parties do the things that the government is able to do with public money, if you like. So it's kind of giving the opposition parties a bit of money to oppose. So
And we're seeing some good points already in the chat for why we shouldn't have it. But what can you think about any
yeah,
reasons why we should have it first, and then we can switch to the argument against it?
why should the government fund political parties? Of course, when we say the government, we kind of mean us, don't we? But through our taxes rather than our
Yeah.
individual donations.
Because then we wouldn't have these individual donations. But then could they exist in other forms? Like, didn't Boris Johnson get number 10 Downing Street paid for by a donation?
Yep, absolutely. There are probably always going to be ways in which parties could get some support from individuals, but that's very much on the opposite side of the argument, isn't it? The rich parties would still get benefits. What do we think? Why might it be a good idea for parties to get state funding? I think we've seen quite a few arguments on that last table with all the data on, and our discussion around it has given us some arguments why state funding might be better or fairer. What do we think?
Yeah, and I think it's just this issue that it can maybe mean that there's more kind of accountability where the money's coming from, because obviously it's all coming from the state in that sense. So
So you'd know where the money was from. It would get rid of this idea of dark money, possibly,
yes,
arguably. Yeah.
yeah, and in a society where money talks, maybe that would be more fair. And
Yeah. Anything else on argument for it? I feel like we're going to get more arguments against it. obviously it partly depends how you would allocate it, wouldn't it? And there are lots of suggested ways you could do it. It could be based on how many votes people got at the last election, but then that can sometimes sort of entrench a situation and make change harder. If the parties that did better always got more money. Others have suggested that you could sort of nominate a party that your taxes go towards, but then that's, is that different from individual donations in a way? If it was just that your money was going to go divided between the parties in some way, of course that does mean that some of your taxes might well go to a party that you really don't like. And you might feel,
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, again, on the other side of the argument, isn't it? But you might really feel, displeased about that. And of course, some people don't like any parties and wouldn't like the idea of any of their money going to political parties. Shall we have a look at what you put as some arguments for state funding? There are lots of potential ones.
Yeah. So I've spotted.
Oh, I've just spotted a typo. I should have spotted
So,
that.
so it levels the playing field for emerging political parties, which I think is interesting. So we see how the party funding does actually in some ways equate to seats won and influence in politics. So is it possible for a tiny party to actually compete with the likes of the Conservatives and Labour? So could it mean that we have smaller parties coming through, where a party like the Green Party could have run MPs in all seats instead of in ones that they're most likely to get the deposit back? Then it's also this idea that, like we were talking about before, it can reduce corruption and this quid pro quo donation situation where, okay, I'm going to donate to your party. And we saw the Marlborough scandal with Tony Blair as well, right? He donated to for Formula One. He donated money to the Labour Party, sorry, and then they said they weren't going to ban advertising in
So it's
Formula One.
the Bernie Ecclestone. Is that the one we're talking about?
Bernie Ecclestone.
Yeah, absolutely.
With individual donations, we have the issue with peerages, cash for peerages, and things like that. So it could potentially, if people aren't allowed to donate, just removes that problem of corruption completely.
Potentially so. What about the other side then? I feel we've had some arguments on the other side already through, I think. But if people
I like this point that was made, like against funding. So the government is too biased, and then there's populist parties. So small groups will still not have the same representation. I think that's quite interesting.
I mean,
and would we have to fund populist ones too?
Yeah, I mean, this comes down to how would the funding be decided and which parties would get money. I mean, obviously, if there was just state funding just for standing for election, regardless of levels of support, we could all start parties just to get our hands on some public money, couldn't we? So there'd have to be some sort of rule or regulation as to, how much money you got and who got it. And if it was just based on who did well in the last election, then it would rather undermine the levelling the playing field point, because it would still be just as hard, maybe even harder, to overcome ingrained entrenched advantage. The Brexit Party were able to do very well despite not having existed before 2019 because of individual donations. They wouldn't have got a lot of state funding if it was based on previous support. But if it was based on just standing candidates, then parties that don't really get any support at all would have got a lot of money. So it's a tricky one. The dog, incidentally, was my dog having a little bark there. Fizzy the cat. I hope there's no sort of cat and dog situation arising there. Don't be alarmed by my dog. Okay, should we have a look at your counter arguments? It's not an XL. It's not an XL bully.
It sounds far too small. Yeah.
It's a very little dog. Okay. So on the other side, we've got yeah, how are we going to do it? What would be a fair way of allocating the money?
Yeah, because it's like you said, the fairness is complicated. Who gets it, who doesn't, who's worthy of it, who's too extreme, and that sort of thing. But also, I think this argument is good too because parties are private organizations. Actually, they might seek office, but they are very much private organizations. So, do we fund them? Is that the correct thing to do?
Yeah.
But also, it's individuals' money. If they want to support a party with their money, it's their prerogative. They can do that.
And I mean, that's an interesting point. You mentioned about the finite state resources. At times when some services might be getting cut, or there's issues about tax levels or hospital funding or school funding. It would be very hard to make the case for more funding for political parties, or indeed not to cut funding for political parties. And yet political parties are hugely useful. They do serve a function in society, and it may not seem like an important one compared with schools and hospitals, but they do kind of drive our democracy. But you can imagine that debate, couldn't you, if there was a lot of public spending cuts, the austerity type agenda,
Yeah.
and making the case to maintain or indeed increase political party spending at a time when other resources were being reduced could be hugely problematic. And Chile's
Yeah, and
talking about
there's
that in relation to the national
yeah.
debt, and people talk about things like HS2 and things like that. So yeah, absolutely. Very, very problematic. I'm going to come back to the studio. Some really good answers. Yeah, well done, guys. There are, I can't remember in the end how many were joining in. So four or five of you answering some questions after initially Fizzy the cat taking a loan.
Strong
A
lead.
loan. Strong lead, yeah, absolutely. So well done, and thank you for getting involved. And it's good to see that sort of debate developing, because that's essentially what your essays and your answers are all about. These kind of arguments and counter arguments. And this one about funding of political parties is a hugely interesting and important one. And it's good to get you all thinking about that. Okay, we are doing this again same time next week. And I keep doing this and not double checking what it's going to be before I say we're doing it. But it is going to be. Oh, I was hoping Ciara was going to come straight off there and tell me what it was.
Sorry.
No, it's either voting systems or general elections. And
Yeah.
keep an eye out. If you want to get notifications of our next live streams, then click the little bell icon, the notifications icon, and it will tell you. You can click the like to like the video, and that helps other people find these videos. And absolutely, and you can subscribe to Chew if you haven't already, and it might well be that some of your other subjects are doing live streams as well. Chile doesn't do politics, so we might do some of the other subjects that you do might well be doing. Oh, absolutely. Well, you can go and join Jeff for an economics one. Absolutely, that'd be brilliant. Okay, so thanks very much, guys, for your contributions, and we will see you next time. Good night, and thanks, Ciara. All right, cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.